How dare you touch that piano? Vanessa Monroe's voice cut through the elegant ballroom like a knife, making everyone freeze. You're the help, not the entertainment. But as Imani's fingers touched the keys, unleashing a virtuoso performance that left the wealthy crowd breathless, the tables dramatically turned. What made this black woman hide her extraordinary gift while serving champagne to the elite? And how would Vanessa react when she discovered the devastating truth behind Imani's journey? A humiliation attempt transformed into an awakening that would change both women forever, in ways no one could predict. This story will move you to tears and remind you that talent recognizes no boundaries of race or class. Dear viewer, if you are watching my story for the first time, I humbly request you write the location from where you are watching right now, subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published new stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. Vanessa Monroe surveyed her sprawling Westchester mansion with a critical eye, her Louboutin heels clicking authoritatively across the marble floor. The annual Monroe Foundation Charity Gala was her crown jewel, the event that cemented her position among New York's elite. The flowers should be white roses, not cream, she snapped at a flinching florist. And make sure they're arranged in crystal vases. The last thing we need is to look common. At 45, Vanessa had perfected the art of philanthropy as social currency. Her charity gala raised funds for urban education, though she'd never set foot in any of the schools that benefited from her generosity. "Darling, you're working yourself into a state," cooed Melanie Winters, Vanessa's longtime friend and fellow socialite. "Everything will be perfect, as always." "It needs to be perfect," Vanessa hissed. "The Whitmores and the Crawfords are attending this year. Do you know how hard I worked to get them on the guest list?" Across town in a modest Bronx apartment, Imani Johnson's fingers danced across piano keys that had seen better days. At 26, she was playing catch-up on a dream deferred. Her mother had sacrificed everything to give her early piano lessons, recognizing her daughter's gift. But life had intervened, her mother's illness, financial hardship, and the realities of being black in a classical music world that wasn't designed for her. Imani's phone buzzed, interrupting her practice. "Girl, I got you that catering gig," her friend Tasha's voice came through. "Tomorrow at the Monroe Mansion in Westchester. It pays $200 for the night." Imani's heart sank. She had planned to practice for an upcoming audition, but her rent was due, and her daytime job as a music store clerk barely covered essentials. "Thanks, Tash. I'll be there," she said, closing her worn music book. A night serving champagne to the wealthy wasn't how she'd planned to spend her Saturday, but necessity didn't care about her plans. Later that evening, as Vanessa reviewed the guest list with her event planner, she tapped a manicured nail against a particular name. "Marcus Bennett? The Marcus Bennett? The music producer?" she asked, eyes gleaming. "Yes, Mrs. Monroe. He confirmed yesterday." Vanessa's red lips curled into a satisfied smile. "Perfect. This year's gala just became even more prestigious." What Vanessa couldn't know, was that her carefully orchestrated event was about to become the stage for an unexpected performance that would change both her life and Imani's forever. The Monroe Mansion loomed before Imani like something from another world. Pillared and pristine, it spoke of old money and privilege she'd only glimpsed through the windows of Manhattan's luxury shops. "Remember," Tasha whispered as they approached the service entrance, "don't make eye contact, don't speak unless spoken to, and absolutely do not touch anything that isn't specifically handed to you." Imani nodded, tugging at her ill-fitting white uniform shirt. The catering company had provided it, but apparently hadn't considered that women came in shapes other than straight up and down. Inside, controlled chaos reigned as staff prepared for the evening. Imani was immediately assigned to polishing silver, the most tedious task, she suspected, but one she tackled with quiet determination. 40 minutes into her work, Vanessa Monroe swept into the kitchen like a perfectly coiffed hurricane. She pointed directly at Imani, ignoring Tasha and 3 other staff members. "The silver isn't done. We have 4 hours until guests arrive." Imani looked up, momentarily forgetting Tasha's warning about eye contact. I'm working as quickly as I can, ma'am. There are over 200 pieces. Vanessa's eyes narrowed, taking in Imani's face, her hair pulled back into a neat bun, her hands, pianist's hands, though Vanessa didn't recognize them as such. Well, work faster, she said coldly. And when you're done, the crystal needs attention too. As Vanessa turned to leave, she paused by the kitchen doorway. And fix your uniform. This isn't a nightclub. Imani bit her tongue, hands tightening around the silver spoon she was polishing. 10 years ago, she might have responded. But life had taught her where that led. As the afternoon wore on, Imani found herself assigned to increasingly difficult tasks, while other staff members handled simpler ones. It wasn't her imagination, she realized, Vanessa was deliberately singling her out. During a rare break, Imani wandered through the mansion's ground floor, admiring the artwork that probably cost more than her entire education. That's when she saw it, a magnificent grand piano in the ballroom, its polished ebony surface gleaming under crystal chandeliers. Without thinking, she approached it, her fingers hovering just above the keys without touching them. The instrument was clearly a centerpiece, positioned for a performance. You play? The voice startled her. It wasn't Vanessa, but an older man in a suit, likely some early arriving guest. I do, Imani admitted, stepping back from the piano. I was just admiring it. It's a beautiful instrument. Steinway Model D, the man nodded. One of the finest concert grands made. I know, Imani said without thinking. The sound is unparalleled, especially in the lower register. The man raised an eyebrow but said nothing more as Tasha appeared in the doorway, frantically gesturing for Imani to return to work. Later, as Imani helped arrange place settings in the dining room, her mind drifted to her own piano journey. Her mother had cleaned houses to pay for her first lessons. By 12, she'd been labeled a prodigy. By 16, she was performing in community concerts. Then her mother got sick, and music became a luxury they couldn't afford. Now, at 26, she was scraping together money for lessons again, determined to reclaim her path despite a classical music world that had few faces that looked like hers. Daydreaming won't set these tables, came Vanessa's sharp voice, cutting through her thoughts. And for goodness sake, the dessert forks go outside the spoons. As Imani rearranged the silverware, she couldn't help but wonder what Vanessa would think if she knew the hands now serving her had once played Carnegie Hall in a youth showcase. She'd likely never know. In Vanessa's world, people like Imani were invisible, except when they made mistakes. The day of the gala arrived with a whirlwind of last-minute preparations. Imani had barely slept after her late night setting up, but she arrived promptly at 10 a.m., ready for the final push before the evening's event. The flowers for the central table are wrong, Vanessa was saying to a harried-looking event coordinator. I specifically requested peonies, not hydrangeas. It completely throws off the color scheme. The coordinator looked close to tears. Mrs. Monroe, we discussed this yesterday. Peonies aren't in season. The suppliers sent their premium hydrangeas as a mistake, Vanessa cut in. Fix it. I don't care how. Imani kept her head down as she arranged crystal glasses, but she couldn't help noticing how Vanessa's whole demeanor changed when her husband, Richard Monroe, entered the room. Suddenly, she was all smiles and gentle touches. Darling, everything looks wonderful, Richard said, kissing his wife's cheek. Tall and distinguished with salt and pepper hair, he carried himself with the easy confidence of inherited wealth. It's coming together, Vanessa replied, shooting a warning glance at the event coordinator. Though there have been some challenges. Richard nodded absently, his attention already elsewhere. Is Bennett confirmed? Having him here will boost our profile considerably. Of course he's confirmed. I handled it personally, Vanessa said. Apparently, he's looking for new talent for his label's classical division. As the couple moved away, Imani allowed herself a moment of wistfulness. Marcus Bennett was a legend in the music industry, particularly for his work with classical crossover artists. Once, she dreamed of auditioning for him. The afternoon passed in a blur of tasks. Imani was assigned to help the bartenders, then to the cloakroom, then back to the kitchen, a dizzying rotation that kept her constantly moving. She noticed other staff members remained in their designated positions, and she suspected Vanessa was behind her ever-changing assignments. At 5 o'clock, with guests due to arrive at 7, Imani was finally given a 30-minute break. Exhausted, she slipped outside to the terrace garden, seeking a moment of quiet. The garden was immaculate, every bush trimmed to perfection, every flower seemingly blooming on command. Money, Imani thought, didn't just buy beautiful things, it bought control over them. "You're with the catering staff, right?" Imani turned to find a man in his 50s watching her. Well-dressed but casual, with kind eyes behind stylish glasses. There was something familiar about him. "Yes, sir," she replied politely. "I was just taking my break." "No need for, sir," he said with a warm smile. "I'm Marcus." Imani's heart skipped. Marcus Bennett, the Marcus Bennett, was standing before her, making small talk as if they were equals. "I'm Imani," she managed, hoping her voice didn't betray her excitement. "Imani," he repeated. "That's a beautiful name. It means faith in Swahili, doesn't it?" She nodded, surprised. "My mother chose it. She said a person needs faith to pursue the arts." "Your mother sounds wise," Marcus said. "Are you an artist, Imani?" Before she could answer, Vanessa's voice cut through the garden like a knife. "Marcus. There you are. I see you've met our staff." The warmth in Marcus's expression didn't fade, but Imani recognized her cue. "I should get back to work," she said quietly, nodding respectfully to both of them before walking away. Behind her, she heard Vanessa say, "The help these days, no sense of boundaries. I hope she wasn't bothering you." As the clock struck 6, disaster struck. Vanessa's phone rang, and from across the room, Imani could see her face transform from irritation to horror. "What do you mean you can't come?" Vanessa was nearly shouting. "You're the pianist. The gala starts in an hour." The event coordinator was summoned, emergency calls were made, but the verdict was clear: their pianist had food poisoning and no replacement could be found on such short notice. "What about the playlist we prepared as backup?" Richard suggested. "Recorded music? At our gala?" Vanessa looked aghast. "We might as well serve boxed wine." As staff scurried to solve the crisis, Imani continued her work, setting out champagne flutes for the welcome reception. Inside, her heart was racing. She knew every piece that had been planned for the evening, she'd glimpsed the program earlier. She could play them all. But that would mean revealing herself. Stepping out of invisibility. Risking humiliation if Vanessa rejected her offer, or worse, if she accepted it and Imani's skills weren't as sharp as she believed them to be. As the first guests began to arrive, Vanessa's panic was hidden behind a perfect hostess smile, but Imani could see it in her eyes. The centerpiece of her cultural evening was missing, and with it, her chance to impress Marcus Bennett, a man known for his appreciation of fine music. Imani took a deep breath and made her decision. By 7:30, the gala was in full swing. Diamonds glittered under crystal chandeliers as New York's elite mingled, champagne flutes in hand. Imani moved through the crowd with a silver tray, invisible except when someone needed a fresh drink. Vanessa was working the room masterfully, her crisis concealed behind a dazzling smile. But Imani noticed her frequent glances toward the silent piano, a glaring reminder of the evening's impending failure. "When is the performance starting, Vanessa?" asked an elderly woman dripping in pearls. "I so look forward to the musical portion of your galas." "Shortly, Mrs. Whitmore," Vanessa replied smoothly. "We're allowing everyone to arrive first." Imani watched as Marcus Bennett entered the ballroom. Unlike the other guests, he seemed to notice the staff, nodding politely as a waiter offered hors d'oeuvres. When his eyes met Imani's, he smiled in recognition. Vanessa noticed the exchange and quickly intercepted, linking her arm through Marcus's. "I must introduce you to the Crawfords," she insisted, leading him away. "They're tremendous supporters of the arts. As they passed Imani, Vanessa's shoulder bumped her tray, causing champagne to splash onto Imani's white shirt. "Oh dear," Vanessa said without a hint of sincerity. "Do clean yourself up." Imani retreated to the kitchen, dabbing at her uniform with a damp cloth. Through the service door, she could hear Vanessa tapping on a glass, calling for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, I regret to inform you that our scheduled pianist has taken ill." A murmur of disappointment rippled through the crowd. However, Vanessa continued, "The Monroe Foundation Gala has always been known for its adaptability." Imani returned to the ballroom just as Vanessa's gaze fixed on her, cold, calculating, and suddenly inspired. "In fact," Vanessa continued, "I believe we might have an unexpected opportunity for cultural exchange." Her lips curved into what might have looked like a smile to others but struck Imani as predatory. "One of our serving staff has been admiring our Steinway all evening. Perhaps she'd like to demonstrate her talents." The room fell silent. Some guests looked uncomfortable, others curious, a few openly amused. Richard Monroe frowned at his wife, while Marcus Bennett watched the scene with unreadable eyes. Imani stood frozen, the damp spot on her uniform suddenly feeling like a spotlight. "Come now," Vanessa beckoned, her voice honey-sweet with malice. "Don't be shy. You were so interested in the piano earlier." It was clear what Vanessa expected, an awkward refusal, or worse, a fumbling attempt that would provide the evening's entertainment at Imani's expense. Either way, Vanessa would appear magnanimous for offering the opportunity, while reinforcing the boundary between her world and Imani's. Tasha appeared at Imani's side, whispering urgently, "Don't do it. She's setting you up." But Imani had made her decision hours ago. Silently, she handed her tray to Tasha and walked toward the piano, aware of every eye in the room following her. "How brave," Vanessa remarked, the word dripping with condescension. "Let's all encourage our impromptu entertainer." A smattering of hesitant applause followed as Imani took her seat at the bench. The Steinway gleamed under the chandeliers, its keys immaculate. It was a far cry from the worn upright she practiced on at home, or even the decent baby grand at her community college. "Perhaps something simple," Vanessa suggested, standing nearby. "Chopsticks, or Mary Had a Little Lamb." Laughter rippled through sections of the crowd. Imani's cheeks burned, but she kept her expression neutral as she adjusted the bench. Marcus Bennett had moved closer, his expression one of genuine interest rather than morbid curiosity. "Play whatever moves you," he said quietly, earning a sharp look from Vanessa. Imani closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. Then, without preamble, her fingers touched the keys. The opening notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor filled the room, not a simple piece by any measure, but one of the most challenging and emotionally complex works in the classical repertoire. The laughter died instantly. The ballroom fell into stunned silence as Imani's fingers moved across the keys with practiced precision. The Chopin Ballade was a piece that began deceptively simply but built into technical complexity that challenged even seasoned concert pianists. Vanessa's smug smile froze, then gradually faded as the music swelled. This was not the fumbling attempt she had expected. This was mastery. Imani lost herself in the performance, forgetting the stained uniform, the judgmental stares, Vanessa's cruelty. The Steinway responded to her touch as if they'd been partners for years, its rich tone filling every corner of the vast room. As a child, Imani had first heard this piece at a community concert in the Bronx. Her mother had taken her as a special birthday treat when she turned 8. Sitting in the back row of the modest venue, young Imani had been transfixed, telling her mother afterward, "I want to make people feel like that." For 3 years, her mother had worked extra cleaning jobs to pay for lessons with a retired pianist from Juilliard. By 12, Imani was performing in student showcases. By 15, she'd earned a spot in a prestigious youth orchestra, the only black girl among the first-chair pianists. Then came her mother's diagnosis. Cancer. Aggressive. The lessons stopped. The practices became sporadic, squeezed between hospital visits and picking up extra shifts at the local grocery store to help with bills. All these memories flowed through Imani's fingers into the music, giving the Chopin a depth of feeling that technical perfection alone could never achieve. Across the room, Marcus Bennett had taken a seat, his full attention on Imani. Several guests had pulled out phones, recording the unexpected performance. Richard Monroe watched with genuine appreciation, while Vanessa stood rigid, her plan backfiring spectacularly. As Imani approached the piece's dramatic climax, she opened her eyes briefly. The faces watching her were transformed, no longer the indifferent or amused expressions of people expecting entertainment at her expense, but the captivated looks of an audience experiencing true artistry. Only Vanessa remained unmoved, her features hardened into a mask of displeasure. When the final notes resonated through the ballroom, there was a moment of complete silence, that magical pause after a powerful performance when an audience collectively holds its breath. Then the applause erupted, genuine and enthusiastic. "Brava!" called Marcus Bennett, rising to his feet. Others followed his lead in a standing ovation that would have been unimaginable minutes earlier. Imani rose from the bench, her professional mask back in place. She gave a small, dignified bow, not the deep curtsy of a concert performer, but the acknowledgement of someone who knew her worth. That was. Richard Monroe approached, searching for words. "Extraordinary. Where did you study?" Before Imani could answer, Vanessa inserted herself between them. "How surprising," she said tightly. "Who would have thought the help was hiding such talents? One might almost wonder why someone with such abilities would be serving drinks for a living." The jab was clear, but it missed its mark. Imani had endured far worse. "I studied at the Community Music School of the Bronx, then briefly at Juilliard before personal circumstances interrupted," she replied calmly. "Music remains my passion, even if circumstances have led me to other work." Marcus Bennett had joined them now. "Juilliard?" he asked. "Under whom?" "Professor Eleanor Whitman," Imani said. "Though only for 2 semesters." Marcus nodded, recognition in his eyes. "Eleanor doesn't accept many students. She must have seen something special in you." "I certainly do." Vanessa's smile was brittle. "Well, this has been a charming interlude, but perhaps we should let Imani return to her actual duties. The evening is hardly over." But the dynamics had shifted. The invisible line between server and guest had been crossed. Imani had emerged as something more than her uniform, and the room knew it. As she made her way back toward the kitchen, guests stopped her, asking questions, offering compliments. For the first time that evening, they saw her face, her name, her humanity. And Vanessa Monroe saw something else entirely, a threat to her carefully controlled narrative. "That will be quite enough disruption for one evening," Vanessa announced, her voice carrying across the ballroom. "Let's proceed with dinner, shall we?" But her attempt to regain control fell flat. Guests were still buzzing about Imani's performance, many glancing toward the kitchen where she had disappeared. "Vanessa," Marcus said, his voice measured but firm, "that young woman has remarkable talent. It would be a shame not to hear more." Several guests murmured in agreement. Vanessa's nostrils flared slightly, the only visible crack in her composed facade. "Marcus, dear, this is a charity gala, not an open mic night," she replied with a tight laugh. "We have a schedule to maintain." "A schedule that included a pianist who cancelled," Richard pointed out, surprising his wife. "Imani has already saved the musical portion of our evening. Why not invite her to continue?" Vanessa turned to her husband, eyes flashing a warning he chose to ignore. "Besides," Richard added, "our guests seem quite taken with her." It was true. The energy in the room had transformed. What had begun as a typical society event, mechanical smiles and rehearsed conversations, now hummed with genuine excitement. In the kitchen, Imani leaned against a counter, hands slightly trembling from adrenaline and emotion. "Girl, what was that?" Tasha exclaimed, wide-eyed. "You never told me you could play like. I don't even have words." Imani shook her head, still processing what had happened. "I shouldn't have done it," she said quietly. "It was unprofessional. I'll probably be fired." "Fired?" Are you kidding? They're out there talking about you like you're some kind of hidden genius. Tasha peeked through the service door. That producer guy keeps looking over here. Before Imani could respond, the door swung open and Richard Monroe entered. The kitchen staff immediately straightened, but he waved away their formality. Imani, he said, his voice kind but authoritative, the guests have requested an encore. Would you be willing? She hesitated, glancing at the catering manager who nodded his permission. Of course, Mr. Monroe, she replied. What would you like me to play? Whatever you feel would suit the evening, he said. Then, lowering his voice, he added, and please forgive my wife's behavior. Her passion for perfection sometimes manifests, unfortunately. When Imani re-entered the ballroom, she was met with enthusiastic applause. Vanessa stood near the dining room entrance, her displeasure evident despite her fixed smile. This time, Imani chose Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece of ethereal beauty that showcased a different facet of her abilities. Its dreamy, impressionistic quality seemed to suspend time in the opulent room. As she played, Imani noticed Marcus Bennett watching intently, occasionally closing his eyes to fully absorb the music. Other guests swayed slightly, transported by the delicate, moonlit quality of the piece. Only Vanessa remained rigidly unaffected, her arms crossed and eyes cold. When Imani finished, the applause was even more enthusiastic than before. As guests began moving toward the dining room, many stopped to compliment her. An elderly gentleman pressed a business card into her hand, murmuring, "My daughter runs a music school. Call her." Marcus approached the piano, waiting until the crowd had thinned. "That was exquisite," he said simply. "Technique can be taught, but what you bring to the music, that's innate." "Thank you, Mr. Bennett," Imani replied, careful to maintain professional boundaries despite her racing heart. "Marcus, please," he corrected. "And I'd like to talk with you after dinner, if you're available. I have some questions about your background." Before Imani could respond, Vanessa appeared beside them, linking her arm through Marcus's. "The Crawfords are asking for you, Marcus," she said sweetly. Then, to Imani, "How fortunate that your hobby aligned with our needs tonight. However, if you're quite finished, we have actual professionals handling the remainder of the evening's entertainment." Imani nodded politely. "Of course, Mrs. Monroe." As Vanessa led Marcus away, he glanced back at Imani with an apologetic expression. During dinner service, Imani returned to her role as server, but everything had changed. Guests smiled at her, asked her name, even requested specific musical pieces. Each interaction seemed to irritate Vanessa further. When Imani approached the main table with a bottle of wine, Vanessa suddenly stood, tapping her glass for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "since we seem to have a prodigy in our midst, why not truly test her abilities?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Imani, darling, after you've finished serving, perhaps you'd indulge us with something more challenging? Liszt's La Campanella, perhaps? Or is that beyond your capabilities?" The request was deliberate. Liszt's notoriously difficult piece was one that even professional pianists approached with caution. A hush fell over the dining room. Richard looked mortified, while Marcus watched Vanessa with newfound wariness. Imani carefully set down the wine bottle, keeping her expression neutral despite the knot forming in her stomach. She recognized the trap being laid: refuse and confirm Vanessa's implication of limited talent, or attempt it and risk a technical failure that would validate Vanessa's skepticism. "La Campanella," Imani repeated calmly. "An excellent choice, Mrs. Monroe. I'd be happy to attempt it after dinner service is complete." Vanessa's smile faltered slightly. She had expected hesitation, not acceptance. "Splendid," she recovered. "We'll all look forward to it." As Imani walked back to the kitchen, Tasha grabbed her arm. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "That piece is impossible." "Not impossible," Imani replied quietly. "Just extremely difficult." What Vanessa couldn't know was that La Campanella had been Imani's audition piece for Juilliard, the culmination of countless hours of practice, the piece that had earned her admission before life intervened. Whether she could still perform it flawlessly after years of irregular practice was another question entirely. But Imani knew one thing for certain: she would not give Vanessa Monroe the satisfaction of backing down. The tension in the ballroom was palpable as Imani approached the piano for the third time that evening. Dinner had concluded, and guests gathered around the Steinway with a mixture of anticipation and concern. Many understood what Vanessa had done, challenged Imani with one of the most technically demanding pieces in the piano repertoire. La Campanella was notorious for its rapid leaps, trills, and repeated notes. Even professional concert pianists approached it with respect. For someone who hadn't been actively performing, as Imani clearly hadn't, it was potentially a recipe for public humiliation. Marcus Bennett leaned against a nearby pillar, his expression thoughtful. Richard Monroe stood with a group of guests, occasionally glancing nervously at his wife, who had positioned herself directly in Imani's line of sight, champagne flute in hand and triumph already gleaming in her eyes. Imani took her seat at the bench, flexing her fingers discreetly. It had been nearly 3 years since she'd attempted this piece in full. 3 years of sporadic practice on inferior instruments. The Steinway was magnificent, but unfamiliar, its action and response different from what her muscles remembered. She closed her eyes, drawing a deep breath. Then, without fanfare, she began. The opening notes rang clear and confident. As the piece progressed into its more demanding sections, Imani's technique remained precise, her hands flying across the keyboard with controlled energy. The famous little bell effect that gave the piece its name shimmered through the room. Vanessa's smug expression gradually transformed into disbelief, then hardened into something darker as it became clear that Imani was not only managing the piece but mastering it. When Imani reached the climactic section, a series of dazzling runs and leaps that tested the limits of human dexterity, a collective intake of breath swept through the audience. She navigated it flawlessly, lost in the music, the years of absence from formal performance dissolved in the heat of artistic execution. As the final notes resonated through the ballroom, Imani opened her eyes to a room frozen in astonishment. Then, as if a spell had broken, thunderous applause erupted. Marcus Bennett was beaming. Richard clapped enthusiastically. Even Mrs. Whitmore, whom Imani had noticed earlier as one of the more reserved guests, was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Vanessa stood motionless, her face a study in conflicted emotions, anger at having her plan backfire so spectacularly, humiliation at being outmaneuvered, and perhaps, most surprisingly, a flicker of something that might have been shame. As Imani rose to acknowledge the applause, Marcus approached the piano. "Extraordinary," he said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Absolutely extraordinary." "Thank you," Imani replied simply. "I'd very much like to discuss your future," Marcus continued. "With that level of talent." "That's quite enough," Vanessa interrupted, her voice tight with barely controlled rage. "This isn't an audition, Marcus. It's my charity gala." The emphasis on "my" wasn't lost on anyone within earshot. "And it's been a remarkable evening," Marcus replied smoothly. "Thanks in no small part to Imani's contribution." Vanessa's face flushed. "A contribution that's now concluded. Imani, you can return to your actual duties." "Vanessa," Richard began, his voice low with warning, but she ignored him. "Or perhaps you prefer to abandon your responsibilities entirely?" Vanessa continued, turning to Imani with cold fury. "Since you seem to have forgotten your place." A ripple of discomfort passed through the guests. The ugliness beneath Vanessa's polished exterior was becoming impossible to ignore. "Mrs. Monroe," Imani said quietly, "I haven't forgotten my duties. I was invited to play." "Invited?" Vanessa's laugh was brittle. "You were a last-minute solution to a problem. An amusing diversion. Don't mistake tolerance for invitation." "Vanessa, that's enough," Richard said firmly, stepping forward. "No, Richard, it's not enough," Vanessa snapped. "Do you all not see what's happening here? She's manipulated this entire situation. Probably planned it with the actual pianist who so conveniently fell ill." The accusation was so absurd that several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Why is it so difficult to believe that talent exists outside your expected parameters, Mrs. Monroe? Imani asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. Oh, I recognize talent. I also recognize opportunism dressed as talent. The only opportunism I've witnessed tonight, Marcus interjected, was your attempt to humiliate someone you deemed beneath you. It backfired rather spectacularly, didn't it? The room fell silent. No one had expected such direct confrontation from a guest of Marcus's stature. Vanessa's composure cracked entirely. How dare you, she hissed. In my home, at my event, an event for urban education, Marcus reminded her. For creating opportunities for young people from underprivileged backgrounds with exceptional abilities. Young people exactly like Imani. The irony hung in the air, impossible to ignore. The elegant ballroom had transformed into an arena of tension. Guests stood in uncomfortable silence as Vanessa and Marcus faced off, with Imani caught between them. You know nothing about this woman, Vanessa said, gesturing dismissively toward Imani. Yet you're quick to champion her cause. I know extraordinary talent when I hear it, Marcus replied calmly. And I know something about Imani that perhaps you don't. He turned to address the room more broadly. Ladies and gentlemen, for those who don't know me beyond my name on your program, I'm not just a music producer. For the past decade, I've also served as head judge for the Bennett Foundation Young Classical Artist Competition. A murmur ran through the crowd. The competition was prestigious, a launching pad for classical music careers that opened doors to elite conservatories and performance opportunities worldwide. 3 years ago, Marcus continued, I received an application that caught my attention. The submitted recording was exceptional, Bach's Goldberg variations, performed with technical precision and emotional depth rarely heard in young pianists. Imani stared at him, realization dawning on her face. The applicant was Imani Johnson, Marcus revealed. Unfortunately, she withdrew before the audition phase. I always wondered what happened to that promising young musician. All eyes turned to Imani, who stood perfectly still, memories flooding back. The application she'd scraped together every spare dollar to submit. The countless hours practicing for the recording. And then her mother's condition worsening, requiring round-the-clock care. The choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Is this true? Richard asked gently. Imani nodded. My mother was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer during my second semester at Juilliard. I withdrew to care for her and took whatever jobs I could find. The Bennett Foundation competition was going to be my comeback attempt. Why withdraw? Vanessa challenged, still unwilling to surrender her position. If you were truly as talented as Marcus suggests. Because the final rounds required a week in Vienna, Imani replied simply. My mother couldn't travel, and I couldn't leave her. The raw honesty of her answer seemed to land like a physical blow. Several guests looked away, confronted with a reality far removed from their privileged lives. She passed away last year, Imani continued quietly. I've been saving for lessons since then, trying to rebuild what I lost. Marcus stepped closer to the piano. You haven't lost anything fundamental, Imani. Technique can tarnish with disuse, but your musicality, that's intact. More than intact. It's matured through your experiences. Vanessa made a sound of disgust. This is absurd. We've turned my charity gala into some kind of sob story showcase. Ironic, isn't it? Marcus responded, his voice taking on an edge. Considering your charity supposedly supports people exactly like Imani, talented individuals whose circumstances have created barriers to their success. Richard placed a restraining hand on his wife's arm. Marcus is right, Vanessa. Listen to yourself. Something in his tone, disappointment rather than anger, seemed to penetrate Vanessa's defenses. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across her face. An elderly gentleman stepped forward. If I may, he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Imani recognized him as Lawrence Crawford, one of the guests Vanessa had been so eager to impress. Mrs. Monroe, he continued, my family foundation has supported your charity for 3 years now. We were under the impression that our donations were helping identify and nurture talents like Ms. Johnson's. He glanced at Imani with genuine respect. Instead, it appears they've been funding elaborate social events where such talents are treated as entertainment. Vanessa paled. Mr. Crawford, that's not. In fact, he interrupted, I wonder how many scholarship recipients are present tonight. How many success stories from your program could we hear from? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Another guest spoke up, a woman in her 60s with a stern expression. I taught at Juilliard for 20 years before retiring. Talent like what we've witnessed tonight doesn't come along often. To see it squandered due to financial constraints is exactly what organizations like yours should be preventing, Vanessa. The room had shifted. What began as Vanessa's attempt to humiliate Imani had evolved into a referendum on Vanessa herself, and the hollow philanthropy she represented. Marcus turned to Imani. The Bennett Foundation competition is accepting applications for next year. The prize includes a full scholarship to the conservatory of the winner's choice, plus a 2-year mentorship program. I'm not sure Imani began. You don't need to decide tonight, Marcus said gently. But don't let circumstance steal your gift again. You've kept your talent alive against incredible odds. Imagine what you could do with proper support. Vanessa, sensing her control of the evening slipping away completely, made one final attempt to reassert herself. This is all very touching, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, but unless I'm mistaken, Imani is still on the clock as a member of the catering staff. If she's finished with this audition, perhaps she could remember her actual responsibilities. Before anyone could respond, the catering manager stepped forward. Actually, Mrs. Monroe, I've already reassigned Imani's duties for the remainder of the evening. Given the circumstances, it seemed appropriate. Vanessa's face contorted with fury. You don't make those decisions in my house. Actually, he does, Richard countered firmly. We hired his company to manage the event staff. And I, for one, believe Imani has contributed more to the success of this evening than anyone could have anticipated. The subtle emphasis on contributed was not lost on Vanessa, whose charity gala was rapidly becoming a showcase for everything her foundation claimed to support but apparently didn't. The atmosphere in the ballroom crackled with unresolved tension. What had begun as a showcase of wealth and social positioning had transformed into something far more complex, a direct confrontation with the gap between philanthropic appearances and genuine commitment. Richard Monroe cleared his throat. I believe, he said carefully, that we've strayed from the purpose of tonight's gathering. He turned to Imani with genuine respect in his eyes. Ms. Johnson, would you honor us with one more piece? But this time, entirely of your choosing. No challenges, no tests, just music you wish to share. Vanessa opened her mouth to object, but one sharp look from her husband silenced her. For perhaps the first time in their marriage, Richard had drawn a clear line that she dared not cross. Imani hesitated, aware of the symbolic weight of the moment. The evening had already veered so far from catering work that one more performance seemed insignificant by comparison. Yet this invitation felt different, not a command or a challenge, but a genuine request. I'd be honored, Mr. Monroe, she replied. As she returned to the piano, Imani felt a curious sense of calm. The initial shock of being thrust into the spotlight had faded, as had the defensive pride that fueled her previous performances. What remained was simpler, her love for music and the rare opportunity to play on an instrument worthy of it. Instead of immediately beginning, Imani addressed the room. Several years ago, while caring for my mother, I began composing a piece. It was never intended for public performance, just a way to express things I couldn't put into words. She smiled softly at the memory. My mother called it Daybreak because she said it reminded her of hope returning after a long night. I've never played it for anyone else. I'd like to share it with you now. Her fingers touched the keys, and a melody emerged, contemplative and gentle at first, like the earliest hint of dawn. As the piece developed, it grew in complexity and emotional range, incorporating elements of classical structure with jazz-influenced harmonies. The composition told a story without words, of struggle and perseverance, of loss and recovery, of beauty found in unexpected places. It was technically impressive without being showy, emotionally resonant without becoming sentimental. As Imani played, she was transported back to the small apartment where she composed it, her mother listening from her bedroom, offering encouragement even through her pain. The memory brought tears to her eyes, but her hands remained steady, channeling emotion into artistry. Around the room, guests were visibly moved. Marcus Bennett had closed his eyes, absorbing every nuance. Richard watched with open admiration. Even some of the staff had paused their duties to listen. Only Vanessa remained apart, standing by the terrace doors, arms crossed defensively. Yet even her expression had changed from anger to something more complex, a reluctant recognition, perhaps, of authenticity she couldn't dismiss. As the piece built toward its conclusion, a series of ascending chords that evoked the sun finally breaking the horizon, the room seemed to hold its collective breath. The final notes hung in the air like a question, before resolving into a peaceful, quiet acceptance. When Imani finished, the silence was complete. Then, slowly, people began to rise to their feet. The applause that followed wasn't just appreciative, it was reverent. Marcus was the first to speak. That, he said, his voice thick with emotion, was not just talent. That was gift. And it's been hidden far too long. He approached the piano, speaking now directly to Imani. I don't want you to apply for next year's competition. I want to offer you something more immediate, a special performance at our foundation's concert series next month, with a stipend to allow you to prepare properly. No competition, no judgment, just an opportunity to be heard by people who can open doors. Imani stared at him in disbelief. Are you serious? Absolutely serious, Marcus confirmed. Talent like yours doesn't come along often. When it does, those of us in positions to nurture it have a responsibility to act. He glanced meaningfully around the room at the assembled wealthy patrons. A responsibility that real philanthropy recognizes. The implied criticism was not lost on anyone, least of all Vanessa, who had drifted closer despite herself. That piece, she said, her voice strained but controlled, was that really your own composition? The question seemed genuine, perhaps the first authentic moment from Vanessa all evening. Yes, Imani replied simply. It's been evolving for years. It's. Vanessa paused, visibly struggling. It's quite remarkable. Coming from her, even this grudging acknowledgement represented a seismic shift. Richard joined them, placing a hand on his wife's shoulder, part restraint, part support. Marcus, he said, the Monroe Foundation would like to co-sponsor Imani's appearance at your concert series. He fixed Vanessa with a look that brooked no argument. In fact, we'd like to establish a fellowship specifically for musicians whose education has been interrupted by family hardship. It was a direct challenge to his wife's superficial approach to charity, replacing galas and photo opportunities with substantive action. For a moment, it seemed Vanessa might object. Then, looking around at the room full of donors and influencers watching expectantly, she recognized the corner she'd been backed into. Of course, she said, managing a tight smile. That's precisely the kind of initiative we've been considering. Richard's eyes reflected surprise at her acquiescence, then understanding. Vanessa might be cornered, but she was still calculating. Better to seem magnanimous now than to further damage her reputation. In fact, Vanessa continued, seizing control of the narrative, tonight has been a perfect illustration of why such programs are needed. What better way to conclude our gala than with this unexpected discovery? Her attempt to reframe the evening as a planned triumph rather than an accidental exposure of her prejudice was transparent, but it offered everyone a graceful exit from the tension. As guests began to discuss the proposed fellowship with renewed enthusiasm, Imani found herself surrounded by people offering cards, contacts, and congratulations. The invisible barrier that had separated her from them hours earlier had dissolved, not through their charity, but through her undeniable gift. Marcus pulled her aside briefly. Don't let them appropriate your talent for their redemption narrative, he said quietly. What happened tonight was real. Don't let it be sanitized into a convenient story of discovery. Imani nodded, understanding perfectly. My mother always said talent is its own advocate. Tonight proved her right. Across the room, Vanessa watched the crowd gathering around Imani, the same crowd that was supposed to be celebrating Vanessa's philanthropic vision. Her carefully orchestrated evening had been derailed, her social standing potentially damaged. Yet as she observed Imani's grace under pressure, a reluctant seed of respect began to form. Not enough to overcome years of entrenched prejudice, but perhaps enough to create a hairline crack in her worldview, a beginning. The morning after the gala, Imani awoke to a phone overflowing with messages. News of her performance had spread rapidly through social media, amplified by the prominent attendees eager to associate themselves with her discovery. A shaky video, filmed by a guest and already viral, showed her playing La Campanella while Vanessa watched with visible shock. The caption read, "Rich hostess tries to humiliate server by demanding impossible piano piece, then this happens." Hashtag hidden talent hashtag classical music. Imani sighed, closing the app. The narrative was already being simplified, packaged for consumption, the talented black woman, the villainous rich white woman, the triumphant conclusion. Reality was messier, more nuanced. Her phone rang. Tasha. "Girl, you're trending," her friend exclaimed without preamble. "There's like 20 different videos from last night. People are calling you the Cinderella pianist." "That's not how I want to be known," Imani replied, discomfort evident in her voice. "Well, Marcus Bennett just shared one of the videos and called you one of the most naturally gifted pianists of this generation, so I think you might need to get comfortable with some attention." Imani sat up straight. "He did what?" "Check his official page. He's put out a formal announcement about featuring you in some concert series." "This is happening, Imani." After finishing the call, Imani checked her email to find a message from Marcus's assistant, confirming his offer from the previous night and providing details about the rehearsal schedule and stipend. It was real, an actual opportunity, not just well-intentioned words at a party. There was also an email from Richard Monroe, apologizing for his wife's behavior and reiterating his commitment to establishing the fellowship they discussed. The message was carefully worded, professional rather than personal, but sincere in its regret. Notably absent was any communication from Vanessa herself. As the day progressed, Imani received calls from local news stations requesting interviews. 2 music magazines wanted features. A piano instructor at Juilliard, a former colleague of her old teacher, reached out offering to reconnect her with the department. By evening, Imani felt overwhelmed. Her small apartment, normally a sanctuary, seemed to be closing in around her. She needed air, perspective. Across town, the Monroe household was experiencing a different kind of aftermath. The morning papers and social feeds were filled with accounts of the gala, few of them flattering to Vanessa. While some society columns maintained diplomatic descriptions of an unexpected musical discovery, others were less charitable, describing a privileged hostess publicly shamed after attempting to humiliate catering staff. "This will blow over," Richard said, watching his wife scroll grimly through her phone. "People have short memories." "Do they?" Vanessa replied sharply. "The Whitneys have already pulled their donation. The Crawfords are reconsidering their philanthropic priorities. 3 board members have called suggesting I take a temporary step back from public-facing roles." Richard sighed, setting down his coffee. "Perhaps that's not entirely bad, Vanessa. The foundation could benefit from some restructuring. More focus on actual programs, less on events." "Easy for you to say," she snapped. "Your reputation isn't being dismantled by a viral video." "No, your reputation is being challenged by your own actions, which happen to be captured on video," he corrected gently. "There's a difference." Vanessa fell silent, an unusual occurrence in their marriage. After a moment, she asked, "Do you think I'm a terrible person, Richard?" The question caught him off guard. In 23 years of marriage, he couldn't recall her ever asking for this kind of honest assessment. "I think," he said carefully, "that you've constructed a life where you never have to question your assumptions or examine your biases. Last night, that life cracked open, and now you have a choice about what to do with the uncomfortable light getting in. Before Vanessa could respond, her assistant called, requesting guidance on handling the wave of media inquiries. The moment of vulnerability passed, replaced by the more familiar territory of crisis management. Meanwhile, Marcus Bennett had arranged for Imani to use a practice room at his recording studio, a quiet space with an excellent piano where she could prepare for her upcoming performance without distraction. The publicity will die down, he assured her as he showed her the space. What matters is what you do with this opportunity. I'm not sure I'm ready, Imani admitted. My technique will return quickly, Marcus finished. You need practice time, certainly, but your fundamentals are solid. More importantly, you have something many technically perfect pianists lack, something to say. He gestured to the sleek grand piano. Your composition last night, Daybreak, I'd like you to consider performing it as part of your program. It's exceptional. Imani ran her fingers lightly over the keys. It's very personal. The best music always is, Marcus replied. Think about it. In the meantime, this room is yours whenever you need it. As Marcus left, Imani began to play, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. The piano responded beautifully, every note clear and resonant. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future where music was her profession, not just her passion. 3 days after the gala, an unexpected email arrived from the catering company. Imani had been bracing for termination, assuming Vanessa would have demanded it. Instead, the message informed her that her services would no longer be needed because she had received a private sponsorship to pursue musical studies full-time. The sponsor was anonymous, but the implication was clear. That evening, as Imani was leaving the practice room, the receptionist stopped her. Package for you, she said, handing over a small, elegantly wrapped box. Inside was a vintage metronome, a beautiful, wooden-cased model that Imani recognized as a professional-grade instrument costing several $1,000s. The card attached read simply, "Every journey requires the right tools. R.M." Richard Monroe's gesture was thoughtful, but what struck Imani most was what wasn't there: no public announcement, no self-congratulatory social media post, no attempt to position himself as her savior. Just a quiet acknowledgement of her needs and his resources. As Imani headed home, her phone chimed with yet another news alert about the Cinderella pianist. The story was evolving beyond her control, becoming a symbol rather than her lived experience. But amid the noise, something genuine was taking root, an opportunity earned through talent and resilience, not granted through charity or luck. Whatever came next, Imani was determined to ensure that her music, not the circumstances of its discovery, would define her path forward. 2 weeks after the gala, Imani sat in a sun-drenched corner of a small coffee shop, waiting. The bell above the door jingled, and Vanessa Monroe entered, looking both imperious and strangely vulnerable without her usual entourage. This meeting had been unexpected. The terse email requesting a brief conversation at your convenience had surprised Imani. She had considered declining but ultimately decided that closure might benefit them both. Thank you for agreeing to meet, Vanessa said, taking the seat opposite Imani. Gone was the dripping condescension from their previous encounters, replaced with stiff formality. I was curious about what you wanted to discuss, Imani replied neutrally. Vanessa ordered a tea, then folded her hands on the table. I've been advised by our foundation's PR team to make a public apology to you. They've drafted a very eloquent statement about learning moments and growth opportunities. She pronounced the phrases with distaste. I'm not here to deliver that statement. Performative contrition has never been my style. Why are you here, then? Imani asked directly. Vanessa's perfectly manicured nails tapped once against the table, the only sign of her discomfort. I've been doing some reflecting since that night. The admission seemed difficult for her. Imani remained silent, allowing her to continue. I've spent most of my life in spaces where everyone looks like me, thinks like me, and values what I value, Vanessa said slowly. My charity work was, well, let's call it what it was, a social enhancement strategy. Something expected of women in my position. She paused as the server brought her tea. Richard has taken over the foundation's operations. He's making substantial changes, fewer galas, more direct programming. The fellowship he mentioned is being established, regardless of my reservations. That sounds positive, Imani observed. It's necessary, Vanessa conceded. The videos from that night made certain realities impossible to ignore. She sipped her tea, then set it down with deliberate care. I grew up believing that talent and opportunity were naturally aligned, that cream always rose to the top. Meeting you has been inconvenient for that worldview. The admission, though hardly warm, represented significant self-awareness from a woman who'd shown none before. May I ask you something personal? Vanessa continued. When Imani nodded, she asked, how did you maintain your ability through years without proper training or equipment? Most classically trained pianists consider daily practice on a quality instrument essential. The question seemed genuinely curious rather than skeptical. Necessity breeds adaptation, Imani replied. I practiced on a keyboard with weighted keys when I couldn't access a piano. I worked mentally through pieces during my commute. I listened critically to recordings, analyzing interpretations when I couldn't create my own. She smiled slightly. And my mother remortgaged her home to keep me at Juilliard as long as she could, even knowing she was ill. That kind of sacrifice creates a responsibility to honor the gift. Something shifted in Vanessa's expression, a recognition, perhaps, of a value system entirely different from but no less valid than her own. The night of the gala, Vanessa said after a moment, I intended to embarrass you. I should acknowledge that explicitly. I know, Imani replied simply. What I didn't expect was how it would feel to be wrong. Not just socially outmaneuvered, but fundamentally incorrect in my assumptions. Vanessa straightened her already perfect posture. It's not a familiar sensation for me. Imani couldn't help a small smile. Is this an apology, Mrs. Monroe? It's an acknowledgement, Vanessa corrected. I behaved badly based on flawed premises. That behavior had consequences, for you, initially intended to be negative, and for me, ultimately quite damaging. She met Imani's eyes directly. I can't claim I've had some miraculous transformation. People rarely change their core beliefs overnight. But I am reassessing certain assumptions. Coming from Vanessa, this was perhaps the closest thing to humility she could manage. Imani recognized the effort it represented. I appreciate your honesty, she said. It's more valuable than a PR-crafted apology would have been. Vanessa nodded, then reached into her handbag and withdrew an envelope, sliding it across the table. Richard doesn't know I'm doing this. Neither does Marcus. This isn't about publicity or redemption. Imani opened the envelope to find a check for a substantial sum, made out to her personally. This isn't charity, Vanessa said quickly, as if the word itself was distasteful. Consider it reparation for a professional opportunity compromised by personal bias. Use it for whatever you need, a piano, living expenses while you prepare for your performance, additional training. Imani studied the check, conflicted. I'm not sure I can accept this. You can and you should, Vanessa insisted. Not for my conscience, but for your talent. If our positions were reversed, I would take every advantage offered without hesitation. There was something almost refreshing about Vanessa's continued self-interest, even in her attempt at amends. It felt more authentic than sudden, complete reformation would have. Thank you, Imani said finally, tucking the check into her bag. I'll use it well. Vanessa nodded briskly, clearly relieved to have the transaction completed. She rose to leave, then hesitated. Your original composition, Daybreak. It was exceptional. I'm not easily moved, but that piece. She trailed off, uncharacteristically at a loss for words. Music speaks truths we sometimes can't hear in conversation, Imani offered. Perhaps, Vanessa conceded. Good luck with your concert. I won't be attending, my presence would create unnecessary complications, but I will be interested in your progress. With that, she departed, leaving Imani with the sense that while no friendship had been formed, something important had nonetheless transpired, a recognition, however reluctant, of shared humanity across the divides of privilege and experience. As Imani walked to her practice session later that day, she reflected on the unexpected turns her life had taken in just 2 weeks. The viral videos were already fading from public interest, but the opportunities they had created remained solid. She thought of her mother, who had believed so fiercely in her gift even when circumstances made nurturing it nearly impossible. "Your talent isn't just yours," she used to say. "It's meant to reach others. That's why you can't give up on it, even when the path seems blocked." The path had indeed seemed blocked, by poverty, by grief, by the realities of being a black woman in a classical music world that still struggled with true inclusion. Yet somehow, through an unlikely confrontation with someone who represented everything stacked against her, a new way forward had opened. As Imani began her practice, she played the opening notes of "Daybreak," her mother's favorite piece, now becoming her signature. The music filled the room with its story of loss and perseverance, of darkness gradually giving way to light. In 3 weeks, she would perform it publicly for the first time. Not as the Cinderella pianist or as a viral sensation, but as Imani Johnson, artist, composer, survivor. The journey ahead would have its own challenges, but for now, she allowed herself to feel something that had been absent for too long, hope, as persistent and warm as the first rays of dawn. The concert hall hummed with anticipation. Every seat was filled for the Bennett Foundation Spring Showcase, which had generated unusual buzz due to a last-minute addition to the program. Music critics, industry professionals, and classical music enthusiasts had all come to see the pianist whose viral moment had captured public imagination. Backstage, Imani stood quietly, eyes closed, mentally reviewing her program. The past month had transformed her life. With Vanessa's unexpected financial support, she had secured appropriate housing near the practice facility and purchased a quality piano for her apartment. Marcus had arranged for coaching sessions with distinguished pianists who helped refine her technique. She opened her eyes when someone touched her shoulder gently. "Nervous?" Marcus asked, his expression kind. "Surprisingly, no," Imani replied. "This feels right. Like coming home." Marcus nodded in understanding. "The audience is exceptional tonight. The dean of Juilliard's piano department is here. 3 major recording label representatives. And," he hesitated, "Richard Monroe." Imani raised an eyebrow. "Just Richard?" Vanessa sent flowers backstage but declined to attend. Her note said something about not wanting to complicate your evening. Imani nodded, appreciating the rare self-awareness from Vanessa. Her presence would have created a social media spectacle, overshadowing the music itself. "Before you go on," Marcus said, "I wanted you to know that the Monroe Fellowship for Interrupted Musical Education has been officially established. Richard's announcement went out this morning. You're listed as the inspiration, but not named directly, his way of respecting your privacy while acknowledging your impact." Imani absorbed this news with quiet satisfaction. Whatever Vanessa's initial motives had been, something meaningful had emerged from that night, something that might help others facing barriers similar to those she had encountered. 5 minutes, Ms. Johnson," the stage manager called. Marcus squeezed her shoulder supportively. "Remember what we discussed. This isn't about proving anything to anyone. It's about the music, your music." As Imani walked onto the stage, the applause was warm and expectant. She took her place at the magnificent grand piano, adjusted the bench, and looked out at the audience. In the 3rd row, she spotted Richard Monroe, who nodded respectfully. Without introduction, she began with Bach's Prelude in C major, a piece of deceptive simplicity that laid bare a pianist's touch and tone. Her fingers moved with assurance, finding the delicate balance between technical precision and emotional resonance that distinguished truly exceptional players from merely proficient ones. She followed with Chopin's Ballade No. 1, the piece she played that fateful night at the gala. This time, without tension or defiance driving her, she found new dimensions in the familiar notes. The music flowed through her as pure expression rather than demonstration. After the Chopin, she paused briefly. "For my final piece," she said, her voice clear and confident, "I'd like to perform an original composition called Daybreak. I wrote it during a difficult period in my life, as a reminder that darkness, no matter how complete it seems, is always temporary." As she played the opening notes, Imani felt a deep connection to her mother's memory. The piece had evolved since that night at the gala, more structured in places, more expansive in others. It told the story of her journey, the early promise, the devastating interruption, the struggle to keep her gift alive, and finally, the rediscovery of her path. When the final chord resolved into peaceful acceptance, the hall remained silent for several heartbeats, that sacred pause that signifies true artistic communion. Then the applause began, building into a standing ovation that seemed to lift the very roof. Later, at the reception, Imani found herself surrounded by people eager to discuss her performance and future plans. A representative from a prestigious record label expressed interest in recording Daybreak as part of a collection of new classical compositions. The Dean of Juilliard invited her to give a master class to current students, particularly those from underrepresented backgrounds. As the crowd thinned, Richard Monroe approached, champagne flute in hand. "That was extraordinary," he said simply. "Particularly your composition." "Thank you," Imani replied. "And thank you for establishing the fellowship. It will make a real difference." Richard nodded. "It seemed the least I could do, after everything." He hesitated, then added, "Vanessa watched the live stream. She called me afterward, which is unusual, she normally texts. She said your playing made her cry, which is even more unusual." Imani smiled, surprised by how genuinely this pleased her. Music reaches places words can't. Indeed. Richard raised his glass slightly. "To new beginnings." 6 months later, Imani stood before a different audience, students at a community music school in the Bronx, not far from where she had grown up. The Monroe Fellowship had funded 5 full scholarships for talented young musicians facing financial hardship, and Imani had been asked to speak at the program's launch. Looking at the eager faces before her, primarily black and brown children whose circumstances mirrored her own childhood, she felt the completion of a circle. "Talent isn't rare," she told them. "What's rare is the opportunity to develop it. This fellowship exists to bridge that gap, to ensure that your gifts aren't silenced by circumstance." After her talk, she played for them, not Bach or Chopin, but Daybreak, her own story translated into music. As she played, she noticed a figure at the back of the room, Vanessa Monroe, standing alone, listening intently. When the piece ended and the children crowded around the piano with questions, Vanessa remained where she was, making no attempt to approach or be recognized. Their eyes met briefly across the room, an acknowledgement between two women whose collision had created something neither could have anticipated. No words were exchanged, none were needed. The music had said everything necessary about transformation, about resilience, about the unexpected ways healing begins, not with grand gestures or public declarations, but with quiet recognition of truths previously unseen. As Vanessa slipped out the door, Imani turned her attention back to a young girl asking about composing her own music. "Start with what you know," she advised, echoing her mother's words from long ago. "Your truth, played honestly, will always find its audience." Outside, the late afternoon sun bathed the city in golden light, a real-world daybreak, promising that even in the most unexpected places, beauty and redemption could take root and grow. Dear Fiend, this story reminds us that true talent exists everywhere, often hidden behind barriers of prejudice and limited opportunity. When we judge others based on their appearance or current circumstances, we might be overlooking extraordinary gifts that could enrich our world. Every person deserves to be seen beyond surface judgments and given the chance to share their unique voice. If this story touched your heart or changed your perspective, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Your engagement helps us continue sharing powerful stories that challenge biases and celebrate the triumph of the human spirit. Remember, behind every person serving you, cleaning your home, or working in the background, there might be an untold story of exceptional talent waiting for its daybreak.